Well, hello everyone. Today I'm going through all of the books that I read in March, and there were quite a lot. There was like 11, I think. So I've got a lot to say about a lot of books. Let's get into it. I had a very good reading month. In terms of volume, at the very least, I read 11 books in March. And I am going to go from my most recently read to the oldest book I read in March. So let's start with a 5-star. We're starting off on a high. This is The Screaming Staircase by Jonathan Stroud. This is the first book in the Lockwood & Co. series. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. This is YA, and I liked it. I'm so thrilled. I have a whole series to get through. So the Lockwood & Co. series follows Lockwood & Co., which is a ghost hunting company. We follow Lockwood, who owns the company, as well as Lucy and George, and they entail Lockwood & Co. In the first book, you meet Lucy joining the group. We live in a world where, for some reason, it's slightly unexplained, ghosts are taking over the world. And really only teenagers and children are able to see them and address them. And so there are a bunch of teenagers out there in the world fighting ghosts. And you can die doing this work. It is not easy work. So this little group of 3 join together to solve mysteries, ghostly mysteries. And The Screaming Staircase is their first. And it's so much fun. What I loved about this book is it feels like if Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter had a baby, it would be Lockwood & Co. Lockwood has a very Sherlock vibe to him as a character, which I enjoy. And then this little band, the way that they are witty with one another, they remind me a lot of Harry, Hermione, and Ron. There's just that vibe to them. You know, in Harry Potter, when they're going off on an adventure and they're trying to solve a mystery, and those portions of the books are so exciting and fast-paced and you can't stop flipping the pages. That is what Lockwood & Co. feels like all the time. And I'm so happy that I've read it. I have been listening to them on audio. I'm already on the second one because I'm just completely hooked. Thank you to Leanne from Literary Diversions for talking about this so much that I finally picked it up. Now, the second book I have to talk to you about is unfortunately a 2-star read, and unfortunately it's a part of a series that I'm getting through. This is The Nightmare by Lars Kepler. So this is the Junalina series. It's a detective series. I loved the first one so much. I think I gave it 4 or 5 stars. Loved it. This unfortunately had a bit more of a political slant to it that I just didn't care about. This has 2 mysteries to it. There is a woman on a boat found drowned, but she was never in the actual water. She's found on the boat, still drowned, so it's clearly a murder. And then there's also a man found hanging in his home, and these 2 mysteries are tied together. And Junalina needs to find out why. And it's so political, so highly political. There wasn't what I loved about the first one in the series was there was a bad guy and there was a lot of mysteries going on at the same time. There were a lot of mysteries going along in here, but it felt more like an action, like a political action film. And I didn't care. And I actually found myself actually just flipping the pages and not fully reading all of it because I didn't like it. I wasn't scared. And also, I'm starting to realize you don't have to read this in order. This spoiled nothing from the first book, so I could just continue on. And I hope that this is the end of the political stuff in this series because I really didn't like it. Okay. The third book I want to talk to you about is Yellow Wife. This has been all the rage. One of my best friends was imploring me to read this book. The Yellow Wife follows a Black woman living in the South during slavery. and she is a slave. Her mother has a relationship with the slave owner that has allowed her to have some privileges, I suppose you could say. And it's supposed to be that when she turns 18, she's meant to go free. That doesn't happen. Instead, she actually ends up being sold off by a terrible woman, and she ends up at a prison. It's an incredibly sad story, and one of the things that I did really appreciate about this story was that, you know, our main character, Phoebe, she is born to an enslaved Black woman, and she's also the daughter of the owner of this plantation. And because of her lighter skin, she is desired by some white men, and it follows the interesting and very unfortunate events of you know, how many Black enslaved women were raped at this time and forced into relationships that they did not want to be a part of, because of horrible white men, basically. I did enjoy this book. I gave it 3 stars, and I'll tell you why I ended up giving it 3 stars instead of like 5 or something. I found, well, first of all, the storyline itself was very linear. The characters were pretty flat. I didn't feel like there was a lot of depth to them. There wasn't a lot of history to them. It was like there are good characters and bad characters, and there wasn't enough intricacy in how people are just people a lot of the time, and I didn't feel like there was enough of an intricacy there for me to give it higher than 3. There are several scenes of childbirth in here. And I actually checked online, and Sadiqa does, I think she does have children. Oh yeah, it even says on the back, the author has 3 children. But you wouldn't know it because of the way that she writes the childbirth scenes. It's like she has some cramping, and then she has a child, and they just slips out of her, and that does happen to some women. I'm not saying that every childbirth is long, but this was really fast, and I just found that was kind of silly, and I think it could have used a little bit more work. I can see that this is a good start. I think this is her debut, and I'll definitely read more by her, but I wasn't blown away. So that's Yellow Wife. I never do this where you buy a book and then read it the next day, but I did that with The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. Again, a Leanne thing. Leanne totally made me do this. The Loneliest Girl in the Universe is about a girl who is on a spaceship completely alone. There's no one else on the spaceship. She was actually born on the spaceship. Her parents, they're no longer with her, and she's alone, headed to another planet where they're hoping people are going to be able to live on, because, you know, Earth isn't doing so well, so they need Earth too. So she's on her way, and she loses contact with Earth. All of this time, she's been writing emails back and forth with this one woman, and it's kind of like, thank goodness for this woman, because otherwise she'd be completely and utterly alone. She loses contact with them. There is, however, another ship headed to the same place. The technology has really advanced in the past few years, and so it's going at a faster speed, and it will catch up to her ship. And she starts chatting with this guy who's like a similar age, and she's vibing with him, and there's a bit of a romance. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was so fast-paced. I couldn't put it down. This is YA. Hello. I've decided I'm just going to turn to Leanne for YA recommendations. I trust her. I like them. So there's hope for me. This was so fast-paced. There was so many twists and turns, lots of suspense. I loved the setting. Again, if anyone has any recommendations for like stories on a spaceship, I am here for that. I really enjoy it. So I really liked it. The only thing that I didn't like was the romancy bits. I mean, she is a teenager, so it's not surprising that there would be romancy bits. I was definitely, as a teenager, really into boys. I'm like, oh my gosh, a little bit too much. But I now I don't like that stuff, but still enjoyed it. So I gave that 4 stars. Next is my Patreon book club pick for March, and that was The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. Oh my goodness, this was wonderful. Originally I gave this 4 stars, but I have since bumped it up to 5 because the more I've sat with it, the more I've loved it. And actually, there's a couple of women in the medical field in my Patreon group, and the things that I took issue with this book, they were able to kibosh and prove me wrong. And so I bumped it up to 5. So The Pull of the Stars is about a nurse, Nurse Powers, and it follows 3 days in a Dublin maternity ward during the Great Flu of 1918. So in 3 days, she's taking care of all of these pregnant women who are, you know, very close to giving birth. As you can imagine, it's really hard to read at times because this flu really affected pregnant women. Not all of them survived. Not all of their babies survived. That is reflected here. While I was reading this, it was hard for me at times. I've had a miscarriage, and it was hard to read sometimes because it brought up a lot of stuff. And I honestly worried a lot of the time about my patrons reading this because I was like, I hope everybody's okay reading this. It's hard. However, the challenge that Emma put for herself to have this all contained within a 3-day period was so smart and so hard. This really showcased how much research she did about the medical field during this time, about the flu of this time. She did so much research, and yet you care so much about the characters. You care so much about Nurse Power. She ends up having a girl named Bridie come on to help her out, thank goodness, because she's got all of these women to take care of who are, you know, very pregnant and very much close to giving birth, and like she's alone, so she needs Bridie. You care so much about those characters. I cared a lot about the women being treated. I just thought this was incredible. It was incredible. 5 stars. I can't recommend it enough. Next is a 4-star read. This is The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein. This follows several characters. Our main character is a woman who becomes pregnant, and she's pregnant working at a house. Her employer's son is the one who impregnates her. And he's away for a bit and has given her a ring. And she is accused of having stolen the ring. And she's sent to prison. And the ultimate price that she needs to pay is being sent to Australia. Sent on a ship to Australia to live out her something like 16-year prison sentence. And so we follow her, we follow several of the women on the ship. We also follow an Indigenous girl from Australia who is an orphan, and these horrible white people decide to keep her as like, it honestly felt like they were keeping her as a pet, like as a little showcase. It was disgusting. It was really upsetting, because she is a human being and she's not being treated as a human being. I actually would be very curious to hear from Indigenous people and their perspective on a white woman writing about them, from like writing a character, an Indigenous character from the Indigenous person's perspective. I don't know. I didn't mind it. I'm a white woman. So I thought the way that it was done was fairly tasteful. There is nothing about these white people that is glorified or you know, put in any good light because they're horrible people, and rightfully so. So I thought that was good, but I am curious about that. That said, this had so many twists and turns in here. There are 2 deaths in here that I was so shocked and upset about. The first death, I literally was reading and going, oh, but now, and now they'll survive. And now, you know, when you were a kid and you played that game like Prison, you're like, and now I break free. You know, I felt like that repeatedly for this character's death. I was like, and now they'll survive, and now they'll wake up, and now they're gonna come back into the book. And then they just didn't. And so there were a lot of devastating deaths in here, but I thought it was very good. Really enjoyed it. Gave it 4 stars. Oh boy. Okay. Next up is a 2-star read. This is The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. This is a haunted house story. It's about if the house next door was haunted, basically. That's the whole premise of the story. There's a plot of land. We follow the people who live next to this plot of land, and an architect comes in and builds a house there. And there are several people who end up living at the house, and most of them have to leave it because it's haunted and doing terrible things to the people inside. First of all, I didn't find this scary at all. Like, not in any way, shape, or form. I found it very frustrating that the horrifying moments in this book were almost always sexual in nature. And I know that there's a lot of like sexuality in horror movies. You know, that's just a thing in this genre, and that's fine. But I found this kind of homophobic, if I'm being honest. One of the sexual acts that is supposed to be horrifying is essentially 2 men having sex. And I was not here for it. I was mad reading this book. I will say that it is very atmospheric, and so that was kind of its saving grace, and I gave it 2 stars, so you can understand, like, not much of a saving grace to me. But I wasn't scared at all. I found it homophobic. Not a fan. So I'll be giving that away, unfortunately. Next is another 2-star read. I haven't even hauled this yet. This is The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. This is about a woman who goes to her brother's engagement party, and this party is at a hotel, and they've refurbished an old sanatorium. When they get there, the bride-to-be goes missing. And our main character is a cop who is on leave for some anxiety reasons. I felt like this was a very, very, very novice introduction to thrillers. I found it kind of annoying. I didn't care for the main character at all. I didn't feel like she was a believable character in any way, shape, or form. I didn't believe that she was a cop in any way, shape, or form based on how she approached things and how, like, if she was a cop on a case of a missing person for someone in my life, I'd be looking for I'd be like hiring a private investigator or something because it was so horrible. I also felt like how she described anxiety and presented anxiety in here just wasn't really believable and wasn't very good. As someone who has anxiety, as someone who knows a lot of people who have anxiety, I didn't believe it. And it wasn't scary. And I was bored. I just found myself rolling my eyes quite a bit reading this book, so I don't recommend that at all. I gave that 2 stars. I did a vlog reading The Sanatorium as well as The Burning Girls. I'll link that in the description below in case you want to read it, or you want to watch it, I should say. But I also read The Burning Girls, and thank goodness, because I gave this 4 stars, and thank goodness I decided to start picking up CJ Tudor again, because this was wonderful, guys. This follows a vicar who goes to a little sleepy town named Chapelcroft. But there's a lot of history to Chapelcroft. I think 500 years ago, people were burned at the stake there. A couple of decades ago, 2 girls went missing without a trace. No one really seemed to try to find them. But in any case, And now this vicar has come into the situation because the local parish actually hanged himself in the church. So she's there to take over, and she's there with her teenage daughter. I loved their dynamic. That was a wonderful relationship to me. A mother-daughter relationship that wasn't filled with angst was kind of refreshing. Maybe just like hopeful for me that like Nora and I will always love one another and always get along. I'm sure that will not always be the case and she'll hate me at some point, but I really liked their relationship together. It was very supernatural. I will say that. This is definitely a more paranormal thriller. If you're there for this kind of vibe, I'd highly recommend this. I was hooked on this book and I cared so much about all of the mysteries, and it was wonderful. It was really smart too that it was a vicar, because the vicar is new and needs to get to know all of the people in this little village, and she has an excuse because she's the vicar. So I thought that was really smart, and you don't read a lot of thrillers with vicars as main characters, so I really appreciated it. Loved it. A book I didn't love so much that I gave 2 stars is The Escape Room. I unfortunately just wasn't here for it. I found it very frustrating. So The Escape Room is about a woman who goes to work at like a Wall Street kind of company. And she goes in and you're following her storyline, and you're also following the storyline of several people being stuck in an elevator that are from that company. They're stuck in an elevator and shots ring out and you don't know exactly what's happening. And it kind of goes backwards and forwards in time. I found it kind of silly, if I'm being honest. I didn't care about any of the characters. They are all deplorable characters and you don't really care about any of them. But what I didn't believe was the main character's story of you know, she goes from being like a normal person with some morals to just in the training itself, it's like everyone who goes through the training at this particular company loses all their morals and you know, wealth becomes everything. I just actually didn't believe it. I didn't believe that you could go through training for like whatever, even if it was a year period of time, that you would suddenly lose all of your morals. I didn't believe it. I didn't buy that she was the only person who kept her morals. I thought it was stupid, if I'm being honest. So I gave it 2 stars. And then a book I gave 3 stars is The One. I also did a solitary review, so I won't talk too much here. I'll link that in the description box below. So The One is about a world in which you don't need to go dating anymore because you can just do a DNA test and find your perfect match. And so this follows several people who have decided to do this test and have found their one. Some of the stories are really just straight up romance and it didn't feel like thrillers at all, like a thrillery at all. And then others, one person is a serial killer and he's still interested in finding love. And so I found that kind of fun. It was a good book. I started watching the series on Netflix and it's remarkably different, like entirely different. I think like I stopped watching that because it just was a little frustrating for me. So I think I prefer the book over the series, but you know, the book was okay for me. I did enjoy it, but I wasn't blown away the way I had hoped I would be. I picked it up because I thought it was going to be a fast-paced thriller, and it ended up having just a few thriller elements. More of a, what would you do in this kind of situation? I don't know. It was okay. Let me know in the comments below, what was the best book that you read in March? I would love to know. I hope that you had a wonderful reading month, and I will chat with you soon. Bye, guys.